just a little bit of background about the VCSE Workforce Development Project that we have here at 10GM. So in late 2019, what was then known as Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership and Connected Consultants undertook a piece of research into the workforce development needs of the VCSE sector in Greater Manchester. And the VCSE Workforce Development Project that we have here at 10GM is based around implementing the recommendations of that report. And it's really been about building the workforce development capability in the VCSE sector. So the project has included work across 6 key areas. So those are HR support, recruitment, inclusion, equity and diversity, personal development, leadership development and well-being. As part of this project, we've had a series of learning opportunities around leadership and workforce development. So this workshop is part of that offer. And we've also been working together with the local infrastructure organisations in Greater Manchester to establish a workforce development hub and also a recruitment hub specifically designed for the sector. And we'll say a little bit more about those hubs at the end of today's session and signpost you to those. So welcome, and I just want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering in the session today. So as I mentioned, this workshop is part of our 10GM VCSE Workforce Development Project, but it also connects in with another piece of work which 10GM led on, where we partnered with Data Orchard CIC between 2023 and 2024 to research and understand the state of data and intelligence in the VCSE sector in Greater Manchester. And we're really pleased to have Madeline Spinks with us today from Data Orchard, and she's going to provide a bit of an introduction for you to this concept of data maturity and how we can use data effectively as leaders within VCSE organisations, and also thinking about what we know about how the sector is using data across a whole range of different organisations from within the VCSE sector. We're then going to hear from Alice Mason, and really excited that we've got Alice with us today because Alice was one of the organisations that was involved in the data intelligence project. And she's actually going to share about the journey that Manchester Care and Repair went on and her data leaders journey. So how she led the organisation through change around how they utilise data and how they share data, and also thinking about what that means in terms of workforce development and also kind of changing the culture around data use within an organisation. So really pleased we're going to have those kind of really practical real life insights from Alice today. We've then got some time for individual reflections and breakouts, and then we'll have, as I mentioned before, the open Q&A for 20 minutes towards the end. There are quite a number of further resources that we're going to signpost you to at the end of today's session, and we'll be able to send out the slides to you after the session. We'll also be able to provide a link to the recording within a couple of weeks, but then we've also got a kind of PDF document which just has a list of further resources that can be useful for you in terms of thinking about your own the data journey within your organisation and how you can develop how you use data. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But just before I hand you over to Madeline and Alice, I just wanted to do just a brief introduction. So Madeline is the co-chief exec and co-founder of Data Orchard CIC, and she's also a researcher with 25 years of experience in the non-profit and public sector. She's a really ardent advocate of social change and of using evidence to help organisations punch above their weight. She's previously led a local authority research and intelligence team to provide a strategic evidence base in partnership with public health and other statutory services, businesses and the voluntary and community sector. And we're also joined by Alice. So Alice Mason has been with Manchester Care and Repair since 2020. Formerly, she has been a chief exec at a number of charities working in health and social care and international development, as well as working as a consultant, researcher and grants assessor. And Alice works with the board at Care and Repair to set the strategic direction and leads the team in organisational development and delivery. We were really curious, I guess, to get a sense of where you're at the moment in terms of how you use data. So we're just going to share a poll And it would be great if you can just answer the questions on there, and just answer, please answer honestly, because it gives us this kind of snapshot then of where you're at, and we'll just repeat it again at the end. So we'll just take a couple of minutes, and if you could just, it should pop up on your screen, and if you can just go into it and answer those questions, that'd be great. The results, so hopefully you can see these now on your screen. So the first question we were asking, to what extent do you currently use data to inform your future planning and strategy for your VCSE organisation or group? And I can see there's a bit of a spread there, so kind of quite a small minority of people who are at 5. We've got about, it looks around 60% who are in the kind of 2 to 3 there, and about 30% of you at a 4. In terms of how important you think it is to use data to inform future planning and strategy, I can see that there's a kind of quite a big consensus there that it is important. A lot of scores around 4 or 5. We then asked about what extent do you understand the skills and knowledge you need in your current role to use data effectively. And we've got a bit of a spread going on there. So nobody's saying they've got a full understanding of the skills they need. But some people around, about 35% of people around the 4 mark, and then quite a lot of people in the 2s and 3s. And this is something that I think it's useful to reflect on as we're going through the session today, and hopefully there'll be a bit of learning there for us as we go through the session today. And then we asked about to what extent do you understand the skills and knowledge your workforce needs to use data effectively? And again, we've got quite a lot of you around the 2 and the 3. And about 30% of you saying a 4. So thank you for that. That's really useful, and we'll kind of revisit a couple of those questions again at the end of the session. So I'm just going to stop sharing that. And now I really am going to hand you over to Madeline. So over to you, Madeline.
That's fine. Thank you, Laura. So yeah, I'm just going to give you some headlines from the research that we did. So we worked over 6 months with a range of organisations in Greater Manchester, but I'm going to start with a definition of data maturity, if you've never heard of it before. So that should be on the next slide, I think. So data maturity is an organisation's journey towards improvement and increased capability in using data. The other thing to mention is it's not necessarily a quick one, so it's quite a broad definition, but that's what we're talking about here. If we could go to the next slide, please, Laura. So, and it's also important to be clear on what we mean by data. So when we talked about data in this project, we mean it's a really broad, holistic definition. So it's not just the numbers in spreadsheets and databases. It also includes written information in documents, images, maps, social media. So it's quite broad. And maybe you get involved with collecting data or analysing it, or trying to get the data that you need to report on things to funders. But data is in almost everybody's job across every area of the organisation, whether you realise it or not just yet. It's a little bit like water, so it's in the natural and built environment. You don't always see it, but because it's so pervasive and broad, we developed something called a data maturity framework to try and help people get a grip on what it is and what we mean by data. So we developed something called a data maturity framework. So if we can share the next slide, thank you. So we did a bunch of research starting in 2015, because we looked at data maturity models, and we felt they were very corporate, very profit driven. So there was lots in the private sector, but we wanted to develop one for the not-for-profit sector, or the social sector. So we did some research across the UK, and spoke to loads of organisations, and we developed this data maturity framework, which allows you to have this conversation about data. And there are 7 key themes. 2 of them are pretty obvious. So they're around uses, data and tools. So the data itself, the quality, the tools. And then 2 are about the purpose for which you're collecting data. So the uses and the analysis. And then the 3 are actually about people. So around the leadership, so that's those of you who lead organizations or teams. So that's the attitudes towards data, plans, the capability, any investment in data, the culture, whether it's a team approach, self-questioning, the balance of being, sharing data, but also looking after it well, and then the skills, which is what we're focusing on today. So do we have the capacity and the skills in the organization to use data well and access to knowledge and expertise? Laura, sorry, can you just flick back to the previous one? I just wanted to talk about the stages. So you've got those different themes, but you've also got, we defined a 5-stage journey that organizations might go through, starting with blissfully unaware of the power of data, going through emerging, learning, developing, and mastering. And for each of those themes and stages, we've got very detailed descriptors of what it means, so that if you assess your organization in data maturity, it then shows you what good and excellent looks like, or mastering looks like. So there's very detailed descriptors to give you hints as to what the next stage could be. So yes, so if we can flick through then the next one, and then so this, I just wanted to give you that definition so that we're all on the same page when we talk about data maturity. And this is just to tell you a little bit about the project that we worked collaboratively with 10GM and many organisations across Greater Manchester, including the GMCA and NHS GM. But the focus was very much on the VCSE sector in Greater Manchester. And there are 5 aspects to that. So the first one was around mapping the data and intelligence ecosystem. And we also then did a VCSE sector-wide data maturity assessment for Greater Manchester. And that involved about 266 unique complete responses from different organisations, so 58 organisations, and that was between September and November last year. And then we also did a deep dive into data maturity with all 9 organisations who support people experiencing severe and multiple deprivation. So that was 180 members of staff. And there was an amazing response. So there was about 80 to 100% of those organisations filled in the data maturity assessment. So it was everybody in some organisations, and some of those organisations are quite small. And then we did a couple of case studies of organisations' data journeys, and Alice at Manchester Care and Repair is one of those case studies. And then we also identified with people, so we ran quite a few workshops, we identified potential test and learn projects, so to take the recommendations forward from the report we produced, which is published, and you'll get a link to that later on. So I just wanted to focus this session on the data maturity results. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is showing, with our favorite fish charts, the average score, or the median, for all of those organizations that took part. So it showed the average score is 3. So just on the cusp of learning going to developing, in terms of data maturity of all of the sector, the VCSE sector in GM. But you can see that's the pink fish in the middle. You can see the spread of data, so each fish represents an organization except for the pink fish, which is the average. So you can see there's quite a spread of where organizations are at. And that's nothing unusual, because people are in different places depending on that particular organization. They were mostly medium and large organizations, but some were very micro in terms of the types of organizations that took part. And they came from all over the districts, different districts in GM. So many had about 30% of those organizations work across the whole of Greater Manchester, or more than one area. And the biggest single area that we had representation from was Bolton, where that was about 29% of the responses, and the least engagement was from Berry and Wigan, just to give you a flavour of representation from a geographical point of view. So what I'd like to do now is just focus on the next slide, which is showing you across those all of those different organisations. So if we could just move to the next slide, thank you. We've got the average scores for each theme. So you can see at the top, so the strongest themes across the sector were culture. So there's a great willingness to share and be open about data. The data itself, you collect loads of data. And the uses, so those are the strongest. You can see they were just over 3, a score of 3. So in the developing stage of data maturity. So the areas that were a little bit weaker, and that's the areas that we focused on in terms of what needs to happen to push those to join the other themes, is analysis. So actually analyzing that data, making good use of it, leadership, tools, and then skills. So those are the 7 key themes, and today we're going to focus on leadership and skills, but you can see that's all of the 58 organizations that took part. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. Basically within that, though, that's just important to remember there's a lot of variation. So this is called a dot plot. So you've got different organizations, and you've got the response for each of those themes. So the big black dots along each of the themes is the average for that theme. So you can see again skills, leadership, tools, and analysis. The big black dot is to the left of the median, the overall data maturity of the sector. But you can see the spread goes all the way from 1 to 5 for each of those themes. So some organizations scored themselves as unaware in relation to skills or leadership, and others said, well, we're mastering this, we've got this. So it depended on those responses. So it's just to acknowledge that people are in different places to do with all of this. And if we can go to the next chart, thank you. So what I wanted to show you here was actually, we collect data from across the UK. So we have a benchmark which you can measure against. So this is the GM organizations are the pink fish, and the turquoise fish are UK validated organizations. This was from last year's State of Data Maturity in the UK. We've actually now got about 8,000 users, people who've responded to data maturity assessments, and probably closer to nearly 3 times as many organizations as last year. But this was 213 organizations across the UK. And it shows that on the whole, GM is on a par with the UK. So if anything, I think it's slightly ahead. So your median, your average was 3 across the VCSC sector and GM. And in the UK, it was 2.8 last year. The UK public sector, if we looked at that, is edging it a little bit ahead, 3.2, but obviously they've got a lot more resource around that. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. I just wanted to give you some motivation, I suppose, to think about. You think, well, I can't, I'm busy enough dealing with everything else. Why do I now need to focus on data? But this is a figure of showing the percentage of jobs working with data. So regardless of what your job title is, people spend a lot of time working with data. So this shows that on average, it's just under half of all staff time is spent working with data. So that's based on all the respondents in Greater Manchester that answered this question. And respondents could pick up to 3 job role categories. So that's a lot of time. And if you think that salaries are often the biggest cost to an organization, are you using that resource well within your organization? So Obviously, roles that specifically are around data management and analysis are spending more time working with data. But you can see that it affects just about every role across the piece, including volunteering. So how much are you asking volunteers to fill in forms or getting evidence from them, or they're using information in their roles or data as part of their job. So it's just thinking about that. So it's a considerable and well-hidden cost for many VCSE organizations. And if we think about if we're using that well, is all that staff effort being used well? Is it time well spent? And we found this chart just shows from our national research that only a quarter of people say that data is easily available and accessible to staff when they need it. So there's much to be gained from technical efficiencies like sorting out analytics pipelines and interactive dashboards, but there's a lot to be gained from just good foundational data management and governance and housekeeping. So do you know where all your files are, or are they scattered liberally across the organization? All sorts of secret spreadsheets that you don't know about as a leader. So a lot of that, the cost of staff dealing with data could be, a lot of that time could be just spent looking for stuff, asking for stuff and waiting for stuff. So is that the best use of their time? So I just want you to think about how data is a team sport across an organization. So think about it as a resource, a bit like water again. Is it sustainable water use? So water is everywhere, and is it not? Is it clean? Is the data clean? Is the data in the right place so that people can use it? Is the tap open or is it clogged? All of those types of things. And the chart on the right just shows the average percentage of time working with data doesn't necessarily go down as you become more data mature, but that resource is used more effectively and more powerfully. So the next slide will hopefully give you an indication of that. This is some of the detail that is in the report, but this is around how organizations use data. And this is the purposes for collecting and analyzing data. And this is actually from the state of the sector, the UK-wide, but there's a similar one for GM. So the areas of influence get greater the more mature you are. So organizations that are in the mastering stage are using data extensively to evidence impact to stakeholders. And they're using it to evidence needs, to reach clients for the design and delivery of services. They're using that extensively, much more extensively than those organizations who are just emerging into data maturity. So it just enables you to use that data more powerfully to achieve your own mission. And many are also seeing increased income and efficiency savings. The more data mature they're becoming. So our national research on that. So that was just to give you a whistle-stop tour on why it's a good thing to spend some time thinking about data as a leader. And so I'm going to hand over to Alice now to talk about her personal journey as a data leader.
So yeah, Alice, over to you, and you might need to unmute before you come in.
Did you just want to answer that question from Anne there, or do you want to do it after?
Yeah, okay, yeah, we could just pick that up now actually. So Madeline, Anne had a question on your slide about the overall VCSE data maturity, where she said, does the y-axis on that slide, it's the slide with the fish, or the fish moving across, does the y-axis represent anything on there, or is it just the x-axis?
No, it's just I don't think it does. It's just the data maturity journey overall.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, good question. So, well spotted.
Do also feel free to post questions in the chat as we're hearing from Madeline and Alice, and then we will pick them up as well in the Q&A at the end. So I'm going to hand you over to Alice, who's going to talk about her data leader's journey.
Hi everyone, nice to see you. Some people here I know already, some I don't, but nice to meet you if we haven't met before. I'm just going to start this by saying, I didn't write it in this way, but if you'd like to play Data Leaders Bingo, you could check if MAD's 7 themes are threaded in my presentation. So they are uses, data, analysis, leadership, culture, tools, skills. Tell me at the end if I've got them all in. Okay, so I'm from Manchester Care and Repair, which hopefully most of you know is quite a large organisation in the city. We work with older people. This is titled Alice, the Data Leader, on Mike, the implementer. Mike's sitting over there with his earphones on. But yeah, he's been a big part of this journey. So I hope to sort of explain the problem as it was when as I saw it when I joined Manchester Care and Repair in 2020. What we've done today, what I think has helped us, and what I think is important and useful advice for other people. And then, yeah, a couple of things about the challenges. So next slide, please. So yes, a bit more about Manchester Care and Repair. We are a service delivery organisation. We exist to help people, and we do that in quite large numbers. So our focus is very much on frontline services, and therefore our backroom capacity is, I would say, probably more limited than that of some other kind of organisations. We work with around 7,000 people each year, doing around 10,000 jobs. So each intervention, we describe that as a job. We're quite a long-standing organisation. We've been around since 1991. Around 40 staff, turnover around 2 million. I have a lot of very long-serving staff. Several people have been here 20 years plus, and very many have been here more than 10 years. Okay, so the next slide. So yeah, I joined Care and Repair in 2020 in the autumn. You see my speech bubble in the corner. That's kind of what I thought on day one. No one wants a new chief to change all their IT in the first 100 days. But if it's going to fall over, you've got to do something about it. So what I found at that time was what's politely called legacy systems, i.e. very old kit. Software, hardware, was wired, we still had a server in the office. A total lack of data architecture and housekeeping. There was like subfiles of subfiles of subfiles. There was a kind of a spine filing system, which most people will be familiar with. But it hadn't been looked after in a housekeeping way, and it had lots of little mushrooming parts to it. We had an external IT support person who was a sole trader, so potentially a single point of failure there. And no one named in the staff as a system admin role. Widespread fear, fear. Digital and change, both together, yikes, in the first 100 days. And a lot of paper everywhere. All of our process, system, daily task planning was done on paper. There were loads of forms. There was loads of repetition, retyping. There was loads of data going off the premises on bits of paper, etc., etc. Okay, next one. So I guess what I knew we needed to do and what I knew I could bring to it are described in this slide. So first of all, experience. I've done this before, changed all the data architecture and the technology in other organizations. Honestly, this is the most important factor, that you have confidence to do it, because there's so much pushback from people who have tried it before. There's loads of examples in the voluntary sector. I'm sure some of the people on this call have experienced this, where, I don't know, maybe you've been given 20 grand by Lloyds or something to replace your database, and it just never happened. It took a lot of time, and the project never completed. So that was the situation here, that there had been a previous attempt to replace stuff that had failed. So yeah, the experience, I've done it before, you know how hard it's going to be. That confidence and the mandate to do it. So my role does involve organizational development, and that was sort of explicit in my recruitment. So I know from board level that they were quite happy for me to push forward on stuff. Data needs to be in your risk register. If it isn't, it needs to be in there, and it's very easy to see actually how important it is when you look at Mads's slide there about how much time people spend using data. If you lose that access to that data, that means half of your operation is not functioning. We also did have reserves, and that is quite important because it is expensive to change everything. It doesn't have to be ridiculously expensive, but you can't really do it on the cheap and expect to complete the job, is my experience. At the beginning there, I did also have the opportunity to recruit some new board members, and we were really lucky. We were really lucky to recruit a board member who works for NHS Digital, which helped the other board members who were not so confident or knowledgeable about systems in particular, but also data requirements and security. So he was able to provide assurances about what we were doing. And also there is always some people in the building who get it. If the organisation hasn't been very strong in data, it might take you a little while to find them. But there are always people who are really frustrated by the paper and can see a million ways of doing it better, but may not have had that opportunity. Okay, next slide. So this is a bit more how we did it. It's on the right-hand side here. This is a similar tool to Mads's. This one came from NCVO. So the top one was our starting position, which I used to kind of demonstrate to the staff and the board and myself, but particularly other people, how far we had to go. So the coloured in bit is where we actually were. The dotted line is where we aspired to. And then we kept doing this every 8 or 12 months, and still do to this day. So the bottom one is our most recent one, which I think we did in January this year. So yeah, you can see it's quite a lot better, but there's still quite a long way to go. And at the same time, our ambition has got bigger, which is also quite an interesting part of the journey. If you start with small ambition, you soon reach the edge and then want to push it a bit further. Okay, so these are on the left-hand side here, just some bullet points about how we did it and what I personally think is useful if you're going to embark on something like this. First thing you need to do is get it in the strategy, in the main organisational strategy. So that means the board understand it, the senior staff understand it, it's agreed that it's part of your action planning for whatever your strategy period is. And if it's in the strategy, it should also come with at least an opportunity to agree some kind of investment for it. It's got to be a, how do they call that in politics? A costed plan, as opposed to an ambition without resources. Again, this is quite personal to me, but I do think it's a really useful way to see what you're dealing with, is to really get hands-on with the GDPR stuff. Like, I always do this when I start at a new place, dig about and see what our GDPR issues are, where stuff is filed, is that sensible, is that appropriate? If somebody gives me a personal data request tomorrow, how easy is it going to be to retrieve all the data associated with that individual? So that one test tells you a lot about how many problems you've got in terms of filing and data architecture. And then the other part is, if you're going to build data architecture, I really recommend you get involved with it yourself in a hands-on way. You don't have to be the tech person, but you've got to see what it is you want and get that point across to the tech people. That's quite a hard challenge. I'm sure we all know that. To get them to understand what it is you're doing. And we certainly had a couple of false starts on that with our developers, in spite of our best efforts. Okay, so that was the first part, getting the GDPR down, deleting a lot of stuff, throwing away a lot of stuff, deciding what it actually is that we need in data and what we've just been hoarding, because some people like to hoard data, and also some people just don't ever delete it because they never have time, or they leave the organisation and nobody thinks to close down their folders. So all of those things. Then in terms of moving to the next level, you need to write up some specs, find providers, and probably the most important bit. Identify an implementation group within your organisation who's going to help you. We then work on the stage plans, the sort of agile management style, agile sprints. So we do a bit, we look at it again, then we get on with the day job, and then we do another bit, and so on and so forth. And we had a very clear timetable about when certain things could be expected to happen. We tended to tie it into quarter ends or year ends and give a lot of lead-in time for the staff that this was coming. And, you know, on such a day, they would be using this new kit. I do really recommend using the external tools like Mantis tools or these ones I've shown here to help visualize for other people what's required. Moving on, Laura, I think I'm running out of time. I think it's my last slide. So I'm just going to give you some examples of what we've done. I feel like I haven't really told you what we changed. So we basically wrote a bespoke Civvy CRM system. We put everything into the cloud. We decommissioned all the legacy hardware. And then we also implemented some sort of bought-in tools like Sage HR. We're just implementing a loans app right now. So those are the main things we did. But clearly, for people who've been using, you know, Microsoft Access databases, it was a big change in terms of what they could see, what they could access, and particularly those of us who like to see what's happening in the main theme of the thing in terms of our ability to actually count what we were doing and do deep dives into what difference that made for individual clients. So here's some examples of what we've done with it. Data for commissioning. Now we can give much more in-depth data about the type of client that we work with, who's a typical client for us. That's both in terms of demographics and in terms of needs. We were also able to, last year, we did quite a big piece of work that extrapolates what the demand for our service is going to be like in the next 5 to 10 years, which is no surprise to us, but it seems to be a surprise to other people. It's quite easy to bury your head in the sand if you don't have the data. So we did that last year, and we've also done loads and loads over time with workflow and planning. Just one example of that. We have a fund called Gas Safe, which pays for gas repairs and boiler servicing for a lot of our clients. And we've made loads of historical commitments on it, but nobody knew how many. So every year we were getting really close to the edge and knew we were going to overspend on it. So we did some work on that and we're able to predict the demand against the fund this year, which was great. Otherwise, we would have been leaving some clients in the lurch. So they're just a couple of examples really of stuff that we've done. Oh, this is my final slide. So what do you need? The shopping list. Clear understanding of the risks of not doing it. An understanding of the art of the possible. It really helps if you've seen other people's data architecture. I've worked in lots of different organizations, so I found that helpful. Use the tools and make a plan. 3 or 4 people who can see the vision, a development and an implementation team. They don't necessarily have to be the same. At least one person capable of becoming system administrator on whatever system you've got. If you haven't got someone in-house, you need to get an external to do it. If you haven't got a role with that job title, you need to think about getting one. A good communicator with the trust of the staff on the implementation team. I think it's probably relevant in all organisations, particularly relevant here where we have a long-standing staff. Agreement from the board and senior management to invest time and money. Perseverance. It's hard, it takes ages, loads of things go wrong. A decent lead-in time, no surprises, and a clear switch-on, switch-off process, which is well communicated with the staff. And I think that is my last slide. Is that right, Laura?
Yeah, that's your last one.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Alice. And thanks for your question, Christina. We'll pick that up in the Q&A because we just wanted to give you some time now just to do a little bit of personal reflection. So just thinking about what has what you've heard so far today raised for you? And just to take a couple of minutes, just, you know, grab a pen and paper, or use a digital notepad and just capture, thinking about what you've heard. You know, there's quite a lot of information in there from both Madeline and from Alice, from kind of two different perspectives. But what has this raised for you? What thinking is it sparking about your own organisation or group, or you know, your role, your skills, or the skills within your organisation? So just anything and everything, really, a chance just to free write and capture that. And we'll just move into breakouts. I'll hand over to you, Mads.
Thank you, Laura. So what we'd like you to do, we're going to put you into small groups, and we just would like you to discuss what skills would help you and your organisation use data more effectively. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just a time to reflect together around that. There are some ideas in the report, but it's really important that you think about your own organisation and where you're at. So we'd like you just to take some notes around that, and to feed back in the chat when we come back together. Anything that came up in the discussion. So it's just a chance for you as lead. Thank you for all your thoughts, and we'd like you to just pop in the chat anything that came up in your group around skills and the skills that you need in your organisation, or you as a leader, just to capture some of the discussion. And then I think we're going to move on to the questions, answering some of your questions. So we'll just give you a few minutes to put your thoughts from the groups in there. So yeah, capacity to look at data. Yeah, AI. AI can help with efficiencies, but it is just another tool. There's a lot of excitement. I've just published a blog last week on it, and it's been around for a while. But there's a lot of excitement about it, about the large language models. So you're still going to need good analytical skills. Can't ask ChatGPT to do everything, I'm afraid. Yeah, these are great.
Looks like there's been some really good discussions, actually, looking at the reflections in the chat. Quite a lot of breadth in the discussions and the skills that you're identifying.
Yeah. The thing that I mentioned I popped into one room, and I think the thing to remember is the data and the skills, is it serving your organization? So it's thinking about what you want to achieve as an organization. So any plan around data needs to be very much linked.
Really around this, and share as well about things within your own organization. So I'll just start and just going to share my screen. So we wanted, I know Madeline has already talked about the VCSE data project that ran from 2023 to 2024, which was around researching and understanding the state of data and intelligence in the VCSE sector. And I just wanted to flag up that there is a report that emerged out of that. And in a moment, we'll be posting in the chat with a PDF where there's a whole list of useful resources that you can access around data and that connect, with some of the needs within the VCSE sector. So the report that emerged from the VCSE data project is available on the 10GM website, and the link to that is in the PDF document that we'll share. So we launched the report and recommendations in March 2024, and we're currently seeking investment to take some of those recommendations forward. One of the things that we are taking forward in the very near future is around bringing together VCSE staff who have a responsibility for data in their organisations to be part of a peer learning and sharing network. And the first session for that network is going to be in person on the 22nd of July from 1:30 p.m. And it's going to be at Home, Manchester. If you're interested in being part of that network, if you can email Sarah Hudson at 10GM, and I think my colleague is just going to post Sarah's email address into the chat in a second, and it's also in that additional resources document that's just been posted into the chat, and we'll also send that out after the session as well, along with the slides. So yeah, do take a look at the report. It's a brilliant report. There's also a recording of the workshop session where Madeline spoke about that project, and also there were case studies from people from organisations who've been part of that project. So I'd really encourage you to take a look at that. The other thing that we wanted to flag is the Greater Manchester Intelligence Hub. This is an advanced health analytics platform, and it consolidates patient and citizen data sources from a huge array of public services, so that you've got a kind of single unified view of that data. And it had things like visualizations to help empower health and care organisations, so that you can make that's data visualizations, not general visualizations, so that you can make more informed decisions, and hopefully to help drive better care and better services as well. So there's a range of things on there, from population health management through to health insights, and anybody can access it. So what you do is you go onto the GM Intelligence Hub site, and then you can use the request access button to make a request to create an account. And then on the account request page, you'll see that there is an option there for VCSE sector organisations. So again, there's a link to that in that additional resources document. And we just really wanted to flag up as well that it is accessible to the VCSE sector as well. So you just need to go on, create the account and click through to find the option for VCSE sector organisations. I'm going to talk in a moment about the Greater Manchester Workforce Hub and the Recruitment Hub that we've just launched, and some of the resources that are available on there as well. But we also just wanted to capture your thoughts, as we're coming towards the end of the session. So we wanted to repeat the poll that we did at the beginning, and there's also some additional questions in there as well, so just to help us gather feedback about how you found the session today. So I'm just going to launch that end poll now, and I just really appreciate it, as I'm just sharing some information about the Workforce Hub and what's coming next in the Workforce Project. If you could just take a moment just to share your feedback on that poll. Please be honest. It gives us this snapshot of the impact of the session for you, but also it's really useful for us to know what you found useful, and also what else you might have wanted from this kind of session. I'd really appreciate if you could just take a moment now just to fill that in. Madeline, is there anything else that you wanted to say about the VCSE data project before I move on to talking about the Workforce Hub and the Recruitment Hub?
No, I just encourage you to read the report, even if it's just the exec summary at the beginning, which is just giving some recommendations and proposed test and learn projects. But there's a whole lot of information, loads of people got involved. So it'd be great if you could use that collective research and where people agreed what was needed across Greater Manchester. So I'd encourage you to read it.
Brilliant, thank you. So some of you may be aware already, I know we mentioned it at the start of today's session, that we've been working together with local infrastructure organisations in Greater Manchester to create a VCSE sector workforce hub, and also a recruitment hub specifically for the sector here in Greater Manchester. And the aim of these is really around supporting VCSE sector organisations to be really great employers, and to hopefully give you access in one place to a whole range of different information and resources that relate to workforce development and leadership. So we know that you can often end up having to go to lots of different places online to try and source this information. It can be hard to know whether information is from a trusted source or not. So we've curated lots of resources and content together in the Workforce Hub, hopefully to enable it, it to be a bit easier for you to access information. The topics that are on there include things like HR, recruitment, talent development, diversity, inclusion, leadership, and wellbeing resources, and also learning opportunities that are available, and personal development opportunities that are available, particularly low and no cost opportunities. As part of the hub, we also have something called the recruitment hub, and this is where you can post vacancies within the VCSE sector, and people can search for vacancies within the sector. There's also information on there around careers in the voluntary community social enterprise sector, and how to navigate that, and there's also tips as well about writing job adverts and how to guides about how to post those up onto the recruitment hub. So I just really encourage you to have a look at those. There's an option as well for you to share feedback about additional content that you think it would be useful for us to have on the hub, and also to share, you know, feedback about your experience of using the recruitment hub too. So yeah, just really encourage you to take a look at those. Let us know about additional content you think should be on there, and also please do share about them through your networks as well. We will be adding some resources around using data into the leadership section of the hub, including the recording of this workshop. So that will be kind of going up over the next few weeks. And as I said before, we'll send out a recording to this session and the slide deck as well. I can see that some people are still responding to the poll, so if you just want to carry on responding to that, that's brilliant. I'll just talk through this final slide, which is just about what's coming up next as part of the VCSE Workforce Development Project and some other opportunities as well in Greater Manchester. So just a reminder, if you're interested in getting involved in the Data Peer Learning Network, email Sarah Hudson at 10GM, and her email address is up there and also has been in the chat. Future open workshops as part of the Workforce Development Project. We've got one which is around supporting workforce wellbeing, with 2 people who have been leading on that within their organisations in the VCSE sector in Greater Manchester. That's coming up on the 20th of June. And there's details on our website, and registration is via Eventbrite. And then we've got a final workshop as part of this series, which is going to be on developing your workforce in terms of skills and personal development. That's going to be coming up at the beginning of July. We've currently got a pay and conditions survey, which is live. So just really encourage you to go on and share information about pay and conditions within your organisation to help us better understand about pay and conditions within the VCSE sector in Greater Manchester. And also we wanted to flag up about the range of workshops, systems leadership workshops, which are being run as part of a project with Greater Manchester Moving, MAP and 10GM. So there's a range of different workshops available on various topics relating to systems leadership. There's ones coming up, I know, which are around coaching, as well as around leading through uncertainty. And those are open to anybody that has an interest in supporting and increasing physical activity and movement within Greater Manchester. So I'd encourage you to have a look at those. I think Zainab posted the link to those at the start of the session, and the link will also be in the slides that come out to you. And lastly, just so we've got a mailing list as well for the Workforce Development Project. So, you know, there's an option to join the mailing list too. So I'm just going to end the poll there and share the results. So they should be coming up on your screen and you can just have a look at those. But I just wanted to say a massive thank you. I'm aware that we're coming up to 12 o'clock. So I just want to say a massive thank you to both Madeline and to Alice for sharing as part of the session today. You know, covered quite a breadth of information there, you know, going from kind of really detailed practical examples through to that kind of bigger picture for data for the sector. So, you know, I hope that people have found it useful, and just to say thank you to you both for sharing your knowledge and insight and expertise with us today. And I can see, looking at the poll, that we've got just on that question about how important it is to use data, you know, everyone is kind of scoring 4 and 5 on that. We've got a bit of movement as well, I think, around the extent that people understand the skills and knowledge that they need. Quite a lot of people scoring a 4 now, and about 40% scoring a 3. And then thinking about the skills for workforce, we've got 67% of you up at a 4 there. Which is brilliant to see. So hopefully there's been a bit of impact there from the workshop today. And thanks also for sharing that other feedback. So yeah, I think